Good morning, everyone. So today you and I are going to talk about your value within the company. So let's get into it. Now, I'm making this video today because there is a perception that I have seen in more than a few places, and I want to just give you my take on these matters. And the perception that I've seen is that there are and this is especially true in that good old rivalry between the front-end developers and the server-side developers. And and I hope that you can relate to this, and it may actually have a little bit to do with your personal experiences, but I have seen it more than a few times. And that thing that I've seen is that there is a perception that one is more valuable than the other. The same thing goes very much so for testers, for example, QA personnel, support staff such as operations people and so forth. And what I really want to touch on in this video of mine is, first and foremost, I want to share two stories about two amazing people that I've met in my career that kind of illustrates a point that I want to relay to you, basically. And for this to make any type of sense, I have to talk about value, or rather the perception that you might have about yourself in the company. So one of the things that I've met more than once is that when I started out as a front-end developer, well, I didn't really start out as a front-end developer. I actually started as a Java developer, mostly doing server-side work, and my education was based on it, but I very, very quickly became a front-end developer full-time. By necessity, I got into Node.js and so forth. And one of the first things I learned very quickly was that within the community of programmers, the least respected, if there is such a thing, the least respected programmer is the JavaScript programmer. Rather, it seems that way. And I very often met this kind of attitude, and this was especially true for server-side and more conservative programmers, if you can call them that. They have had, and not all of them, a lot of them have been very nice, and I'll touch on why this is. But a lot of them I met, and a lot of them had a very bad attitude towards front-end development, UI, and experiences such as that you do mostly with JavaScript. And I can only really reason that this is the sort of, what your mom told you, if she did tell you this, back in the day when you were in school and the bullies were raging, and she said, oh, they're just doing it because they're insecure in themselves. And I think that maybe my mom was smarter than she realized, because all I can tell you is that when most of the time I see these people, they have no skill whatsoever when it comes to JavaScript. They basically mock something that they can't do. And I think, my personal opinion is that that's wrong. I mean, strive to be the best you can be, and that's it. I can't respect somebody who mocks something they can't even do, because then you kind of that's not something that I can really get on board with. But anywho, so that's the way it started out for me. And I had a job position where I felt very much that this was the case. I was working at my first job, and the most respected, or within the company, the most value-creating people in that company were the hardened, in this case, embedded engineers. Now, to give you a bit of context, this company had mostly front-end UX type of people working as partly on internal projects and partly in consultancies and so forth. But the best of the best people were the people who were doing automotive work for Volvo, actually, here. That's the way it worked. Like, they would actually build things. They did everything from robotics to small games for demo purposes and so forth. And they actually, which was really cool, were involved in creating some of the internal mechanics in some of the cars at the time. Now, these were highly skilled engineers and very much respected. And from a junior's perspective, you kind of sat there and you just looked at least I did, and I looked and said like, wow, they're so cool, and they're doing all this stuff, and they're getting all this praise, and here I am working on a web interface. That's it. Because it seemed that they had all these things going for them, and there was such a value to what they were doing, and the company really enforced that. They got praised all the time. And then I moved on to my second job, and I was put in an environment very similar to, well, not similar, but I was virtually, when I started out, I was the only front-end developer split between two teams of server-side developers, now highly skilled server-side developers and I want you to remember, I'm not in any way saying that these people were not nice, because they were some of the best people I've ever met, but I still got that same sensation. Maybe it was because of insecurity, I don't know, but that's the way it looked. And I had a few comments here and there from my own boss, which kind of indicated that this idea I had that there was a perceived value to what you were doing was very different. Until I met, most likely, he must be the most successful front-end developer I've ever seen in a company. This guy, who was at the time, I met him when I started working at Ticketmaster. He was one of, if not the person who built one of the company's most appreciated features in I don't know how long. He was the guy who virtually, I used to call him the golden boy, because this guy delivered a project. It was basically a big seat map, and not only was he an extremely skilled developer, he was amazing at office politics. I remember once time we were looking at a video conference where they had lined up all the big wigs and all the developers and like everybody living over in the UK, and then the camera kind of pans over to where the bosses of the bosses are sitting, and he's sitting next, like square in the middle between the guy who is in charge of like virtually everything and our manager. And I mean, that guy is, if he's not running the company, he's gonna run it someday, trust me. Anywho, what was beautiful was that even though there was a majority of people in that company who were server-side developers and so forth, he and the front-end developers were in this almost elevated position. Somehow, within this large, really large organization, they were perceived to be the rock stars. They were perceived in an extremely profound way, I would say, to be the people who brought the most value. They were the popular kids, if you will, within the company. And it was only when I came to realize, virtually that's when I started having this thought that the value that you have, your perceived value, is very contextual. So it really depends on where you are when it comes to determining your own value. And that's why I got this warped understanding of my own value at my first company, because I was working in an environment where the company's values and the direction that the company was moving was very tied into the stuff that one group of people were doing. And at my next company, the context had switched, because the problems and the values of that company was very different. I mean, we had at my office, not just in Ticketmaster in general, but at the office, some of the most prized and respected individuals were testers. And at first that seemed very weird to me, because it just kind of did. But it was only after working there a while when I realized that the reason why they had this elevated position was because they had been involved in moving a platform that had a lot of issues, a lot of bugs and bad practices, and they took in some testers. One woman in particular was standing out there, and she had moved the platform to better practices, and ergo got in the office and the product to a higher level of quality. So she and the others had earned that respect. That's what I couldn't see at the time, but I started realizing it later on. And so what I want to talk to you about here is that whether you're a server-side developer or you're a front-end developer or so forth, regardless of how you value yourself, try to remember that your value, or the perceived value that you have to your company, is depending on the company's own values, the challenges that they are facing. At my current company, for example, I would say that the biggest rock stars there, even though everybody is being treated as rock stars and everybody's very nice, the company's challenges are at a certain point right now. They are focusing on certain areas where the people with a certain skill set have the opportunity to prove themselves and to be valuable in a more profound way. Think of it as football. Of course, the forward is going to be the person with the most amount of praise, because that person statistically is going to have the most amount of chances to score a goal, as opposed to the goalkeeper. And in that context, being in that situation gives that person a lot of value. But in another context, it would have been different. So I want you to take away from what I'm saying. If you've ever felt that as this most likely is more true for front-end developers than anybody else, don't make the mistake to think that just because at your current company there are some other group, most likely a server-side developer or something like that, don't make the mistake to think that you are not as valuable as somebody else. It all depends on the company itself, the context that you find yourself in. Because there are, right now, I would argue on average, and this is actually funny, on average, front-end developers make more money than server-side developers, on average globally now. And I believe that there is a reason for that. I believe that, say, really large companies, they have a lot of things invested into their server-side systems. They have a really large amount of server-side developers. The problem that really large companies are facing right now, which is coming with the trends, is that we are more UX focused. So that perception that JavaScript is just, something you kind of do and everybody can do, it has actually started to switch over to being something that is truly, that is not only respected, but sorely sought after, and there are no people who can do it effectively. So what I want to end on is to say this. Maybe you shouldn't be so hard on yourself and think that some other group is always getting the praise and that you're not all that valuable. Maybe the problem isn't that this is the truth. Maybe that's not really true. Maybe the issue is simply that you are in the wrong context, because in one company, the server-side developers are the rock stars, and in a different company, the front-end developers are the rock stars, and in a third one, the QA team. Food for thought. Have a great day.